Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. Now, I've got the very unfortunate position today to discuss what has got to be one of the worst Star Wars projects I've ever seen. Listen, big media companies, they phone things in all the time, but the Obi-Wan Kenobi comic has got to be the laziest, most poorly made bit of official Star Wars merchandise that I've ever seen. Like, this comic, as we'll go through today, seems exclusively targeted towards grandmothers who know their grandkids like Star Wars but don't know enough to realize just how dog shit this product is. And the comic itself actually sort of blew up a little bit on Twitter the other day, specifically issue 5 of the comic. That's when it first came to my attention as well. However, the comic itself has actually been going on, I said issue 5, since last year. And take a nice look at the cover. This is the only original art, the only thing original at all you are going to get in this entire comic. This has got to be the most amateurish, lazy thing I've ever seen. So the entire comic is a retelling of the 5th episode of the Star Wars Kenobi TV show. And you know, you might think, oh, a tie-in comic. Maybe we'll get different scenes. Maybe we'll get some additional context. Maybe we'll get a different look at what happened. Maybe at least some different dialogue between the characters, some thought bubbles so we get some of their perspective. I don't know if comics still use thought bubbles anymore. No, you don't get anything like that. What you get in the Kenobi comic is a shot-by-shot retelling of the episode with the exact same dialogue, and the art is directly traced in the majority of cases from screen caps of the show. And I mean, this has so many problems, and we're going to go through some of that as we look at this comic today as much as I can bear. But I mean, just on a basic level, I think anybody can see this just looks like ass. The artist here, as I'm sure some of you probably recognize already, is Salvador Larroca. I don't know much about his early work. I'm sure, like, there's got to be a talented artist there. You can't be a major comic book artist, I think, otherwise. But recently in his career anyways, he's become infamous for this really bizarre way that he just takes source material, puts a filter over it, does a bit of line work, and throws it straight into the comic. Look at this first panel, for example. I mean, some of it actually looks pretty good. The parts where it looks like he put a bit more attention in. Anakin's outfit, for example, the texturing there is cool. His hair, however, what's going on there? And that's actually one of the better panels in the comic. He actually did a bit more work, again, as we'll get to. Some of the other faces, the backgrounds, they're complete nonsense. And what's worse is, again, the fact that the comic is thus limited to recreating exact scenes which appeared in the TV show. That's more of a problem based on the fact that Kenobi itself was a very ugly TV show. It was poorly shot, and it was not visually engaging. Episode 5, which this comic apes, is one of the ugliest episodes, and the comic itself becomes pretty much unreadable. Anyway, going back to that Anakin shot, it's a pretty interesting process. Like, it's not simply the screenshots with a filter applied over them. It's a bit more complex than that. Like, you can see Anakin's body is very clearly traced, but the background skyline of Coruscant was changed slightly to better fit the comic paneling. The next shot with Kenobi, again, I can't find exactly the frame at the exact orientation and scale he used, but you can tell this is something an amateur with access to Photoshop filters and a little time could easily do, and it's being sold as a full comic. Like, how do you get off attaching an artist to this? How do you get off attaching a writer to this? It's a shot-by-shot recreation, not just figuratively, but literally. And the point is not just that it's lazy, it's that you're making an inferior product. You've got a comic, you've got all the freedom in the world, you're not constrained by budget. You can give our two heroes at the height of their power, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, the most visually interesting opening as befitting to their characters. Instead, you've got Obi-Wan standing next to a thing on a wall because that's what the show gave you. And that's the continual problem I have, not just with tracing in this case, but with tracing generally, something we've talked about on the channel a million times. When you use these models, use these other drawings, not just as an occasional bit of help, but as a crutch for everything you do, you limit yourself to what already exists. There are some really cool scenes I can imagine fitting into a Kenobi comic. Maybe you focus a bit more on one of the young Jedi families hiding out. Maybe you show more details about the battle. Maybe you show the Star Destroyer from orbit. Like, there's so many things you could do that they just won't here because it's not in the source material. Source material for comics especially should be something you draw inspiration from, not something you literally recreate with the help of filters, rotations, and resizing. Speaking of rotations and resizing, we see in this next panel how even though the scene is inappropriate for a comic based on its scaling, all he does is just copy in two different ways. Like Darth Vader is the Darth Vader from the show and the Imperial is the Imperial from the show. They're just scaled a little differently to fit better in the comic. It's so lazy. Same with Reva in this sequence. You can tell this is Reva. They traced her, but he actually made a bit more after this time and changed the proportion of her head and armor to look a little bit better in the scene, and then scooted the Imperial officer a little bit closer. And some of you are probably noticing that the way I'm lining it up is not perfect. There are slight differences, and yeah, that's 100% true, and that's partially due to me trying to recreate what the original artist did, and I've got to change the position of the scene, the scale, everything, and I've got to also try to guess at the exact same frame. If you're doing this from scratch, it's much easier. Oh, you want to do this scene? Well, pick a shot where Reva looks okay, not too weird, her mouth's not wide open, trace that, and then you're good to go. This is all made worse by the fact that Kenobi is a very poorly shot and poorly lit show, so a lot of the time the details of the faces get completely lost, and man, that's what happens to Haja in this scene. Kumail already has like a very distinctive face, like big pronounced jaw. He's had super low body fat ever since doing the Eternals. Then add the lighting being bad in this scene. You've got the weird combination of like high resolution facial textures with the lines on his face not really coming out well. Like, this is hideous. This is nightmarish. This is not art. It's just shit. Like, it is just shit. Like, is this supposed to be a young strapping man who can pass off as a Jedi, or like somebody resurrected by dark magic who Obi-Wan has to get a quest from? Same in this next comic. Like, is Obi-Wan 100 here? He doesn't seem to know how to properly line his face. It's like around the eyes, yeah, he's very old, and that's got to make up from the fact that the rest of his face is just pure texture. And it's like the depths to the copying here. Like, this random scene, he couldn't have just created some woman to be looking up at the ship or at the commotion. Instead, he picks this blurry ass background actress, and then when realized in comic form, her face is weird as hell. And it's not her fault. She's not weird in real life. It's because he's going off just the most bizarre source material. Like, I could do this all day. I really could, but I don't want to, because this comic is not worth reading. This is not a comic. This is some 6-year-old's project that they're trying to sell to Star Wars fans. It's 6 issues of pure nonsense, pure garbage. There's zero creativity here, and that's what offends me the most. If you want to try some unique art style, fine. You want to copy faces or something to achieve some cool purpose where you're adding a different dimension to the show? Okay, I'll at least look at it. This is just trash. Whoever approved this project needs to be fired. Like, this is unacceptable. This dilutes the brand. I am never in my life going to buy another Star Wars comic after what I've seen from stolen fan art, but even if I were someone interested in the medium, this would turn me off these tie-ins for everything. And it's just so different than how things could be. Like, these are rich universes. I didn't like the Kenobi show, but there's an interesting story there somewhere. The comics could have tied into that. We could have learned more about the characters. Instead, we get a shot-for-shot bullshit recreation. And you know what? It doesn't have to be like this. The art does not need to be this bad. Movie tie-ins can be more than just shot-for-shot recreations of their source material. The classic Star Wars Marvel comic is the best example. Are all the adaptations of the characters exactly like they are in the movies? No. Are there weird plot threads? Yes. Does the Return of the Jedi sort of mini arc end up being just the movie? Also yes, but at least it has a soul. You got a Mon Calamari fleet, which is clearly based off not just the movie, but also concept art. The first issue opens with that scene of Luke constructing and turning on his lightsaber. And at the end of the day, there's just so much more you can do. Like, even when it came to a Mandalorian comic, I was so disappointing to see, again, a beat-by-beat retelling of the season when there are so many other interesting stories. But I think I've went off enough on this. Let me know your thoughts down below.